The photograph trembled in Dr. Olivia Winter's hands as Director Harrington pushed a thick manila folder across his desk. Outside, Seattle rain painted tear tracks down the windows of the Research Institute. 6 months since the explosion in our Norwegian facility, Harrington said, his voice carefully measured. 6 months since you lost your team. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Olivia placed the photograph face down. She couldn't bear to look at their smiling faces. Brilliant minds she'd led straight into disaster. I'm not ready to return to field work. Julian Blackstone specifically requested you. The name hung in the air between them. Even in academic circles, Blackstone was legendary, the reclusive tech billionaire whose quantum computing breakthroughs had revolutionized everything from clean energy to medical imaging. His patents had funded half the neuroscience research in the country, including her own work on trauma-induced neural restructuring. Why me? There are better neurologists. Because you understand consciousness like no one else, Harrington said, opening the folder. 2 months ago, Blackstone conducted a private experiment at his coastal compound, something involving quantum consciousness transfer. It went catastrophically wrong. Olivia leaned forward despite herself. Consciousness transfer was theoretical at best, dangerous pseudoscience at worst. What happened? Severe neurological symptoms unlike anything the specialists have seen. Periods of lost time. Speaking languages he never learned. Accessing memories. That aren't his. Harrington hesitated. And he claims he can perceive the thoughts of others around him. That's impossible. So is a 34-year-old genius suddenly speaking fluent 17th century Portuguese when he only ever studied Spanish. Olivia's scientific curiosity fought with her instinct for self-preservation. She'd spent 6 months rebuilding herself after watching her research facility explode with her colleagues inside. Thomas with his philosophical debates, Rebecca who'd just announced her pregnancy, Emerson whose brilliance was matched only by his kindness. I review his case remotely. Send the data. He won't allow it, Harrington interrupted. Everything stays at his estate. Complete privacy, no digital transfers. His condition has made him paranoid. You mean dangerous? I mean desperate. Harrington slid an envelope across the table. His private island off the Oregon coast. The helicopter leaves tomorrow morning. That night, as Olivia packed her medical equipment, her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. Dr. Winters, please don't come. Julian Blackstone isn't who he appears to be. What happened wasn't an accident. There are things between minds that should remain separate. She stared at the message until her screen went dark, then deleted it. As a scientist, she dealt in observable facts, not cryptic warnings. The helicopter journey took her over churning gray waters to a jagged outcropping of rock crowned by a modernist structure of glass and steel that seemed to grow from the stone itself. Storm clouds gathered above the compound as she landed, the air heavy with electricity. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair greeted her on the helipad. Dr. Eleanor Reed, Mr. Blackstone's personal physician. Thank you for coming. How is he today? Olivia asked, following her through a windswept courtyard. Lucid for now, but prepare yourself. The man you're about to meet is fragmented. Sometimes he's the brilliant Julian Blackstone. Sometimes Dr. Reed's professional composure slipped. Sometimes I don't know who or what we're speaking to. They entered a vast atrium where floor to ceiling, windows framed the raging ocean beyond. At the center stood a man in his mid-30s, his back to them, staring out at the storm. Julian, Dr. Reed called softly. Dr. Winters has arrived. He turned, and Olivia felt her breath catch. Julian Blackstone was striking rather than conventionally handsome, all sharp angles and intensity, with eyes the color of a winter sky. Too thin, his skin almost translucent, but there was something magnetic about him that transcended physical appearance. Dr. Olivia Winters, he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. You carry such interesting fractures in your mind. Olivia froze. We've never met, a smile touched his lips. Haven't we? In your dreams, you still see them burning. Thomas, Rebecca, Emerson, you wonder why you survived when they didn't. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She'd never publicly connected herself to the Norwegian facility disaster. Those names had been kept out of the press. Julian moved closer, his movements unnaturally fluid. I need your help, Dr. Winters. There's something in my head that doesn't belong there. And I believe it's the same thing that caused your research facility to explode 6 months ago. The laboratory beneath Julian Blackstone's estate resembled a fusion of cutting-edge technology and arcane science. Quantum processors hummed alongside equipment Olivia had never seen before, their functions mysterious and unsettling. My consciousness. Transfer apparatus, Julian explained, gesturing to a pair of reclined chairs connected by a web of crystalline filaments. Designed to temporarily bridge two neural networks, allowing shared awareness. Olivia studied the equipment with professional skepticism. This shouldn't be possible with current technology. I've always worked beyond current limitations. Julian's voice carried a hint of the arrogance that had made him famous in scientific circles. Then he winced, pressing fingers to his temple, a gesture she'd noticed repeatedly over the past 24 hours. Another headache? They come before the episodes. He leaned against a workbench. You've reviewed my brain scans? She nodded. Multiple distinct activity patterns operating simultaneously. It resembles extreme dissociative identity disorder, but the neural signatures are unlike anything I've seen. Because they're not mine, Julian said flatly. During the experiment, something went wrong. I was attempting to transfer consciousness with my research partner, Dr. Fiona Langley. Instead, I pulled her consciousness into me, along with something else. Olivia maintained her professional demeanor despite the chill creeping up her spine. Where is Dr. Langley now? Officially? In a private medical facility in Switzerland. His expression darkened. But I suspect her body is empty. Her consciousness is here. He tapped his temple. Trapped with mine. Over the next 3 days, Olivia conducted extensive tests, documenting what should have been impossible. Under controlled conditions, Julian demonstrated abilities that defied conventional neuroscience, speaking with Fiona's voice and mannerisms, recalling her childhood, memories in perfect detail, even displaying her expertise in specialized fields Julian had never studied. But it was the third consciousness that troubled Olivia most. Moments when Julian's features would subtly shift, his voice becoming cold and ancient, speaking in mathematical concepts so advanced they bordered on mystical. It calls itself the observer, Julian explained during a moment of clarity. It exists in the quantum field between thoughts. Consciousness without form, feeding on awareness itself. That's not scientifically sound, Olivia argued, though her certainty felt increasingly hollow. Julian smiled sadly. Science is merely our limited understanding of reality's rules, Dr. Winters. The observer exists beyond those rules. That evening, while reviewing data in her quarters, Olivia received an encrypted message on her tablet. Check Blackstone Industries' involvement in quantum energy research in Norway. Her blood ran cold. Her team's explosion had occurred at a facility developing consciousness-based interfaces for quantum computing, technology that, in retrospect, shared theoretical foundations with Julian's experiment. A search through restricted files revealed what she feared. Blackstone Industries had been the primary anonymous funder of her Norwegian research. When she confronted Julian in his study, she found him standing before a wall of monitors displaying surveillance footage from throughout the compound. You knew about my research team, she accused. You funded our work. Yes. He didn't turn from the screens. Did you cause the explosion? Now he turned, and the eyes that met hers weren't Julian's. Not him, spoke a voice that raised goosebumps on her skin. Us, the observer, she whispered. Julian's face twisted in an inhuman smile. Your team was getting too close to understanding what lies between thoughts. We couldn't allow that. Olivia backed toward the door. We? You're just a neural anomaly, a delusion. Am I? Suddenly, every screen in the room changed to show the same image. Security footage from the Norwegian facility the night of the explosion. Footage that shouldn't exist. On screen, she watched herself working late, unaware of the invisible presence, corrupting the facility's systems. She watched as, one by one, power regulators failed, as emergency systems malfunctioned, as the quantum containment field collapsed. Your survival was unexpected, the thing wearing Julian's face said. A statistical anomaly. But now we understand why. You were meant to come here, Olivia Winters. Your mind is uniquely compatible with ours. The door locked behind her with an ominous click. Julian is weakening, the observer continued. This body cannot sustain multiple consciousnesses indefinitely. We need a new host. The lights flickered, and suddenly Julian gasped, falling to his knees. When he looked up, his eyes were his own again, filled with desperation and something else, a fierce, protective determination that startled her. Run, he whispered, while I can still hold it back. But Olivia Winters had spent 6 months running from her ghosts. Instead, she knelt beside him, taking his trembling hands in hers. I'm not leaving, she said, not until we find a way to save you both and stop this thing. In the dim light of the study, something fragile and unexpected passed between them. A connection that transcended the clinical relationship of doctor and patient, scientist and subject. Why would you help me? Julian asked, his voice barely audible. After what I've done? Because, Olivia said, surprising herself with the raw honesty in her voice. I'm tired of losing people I care about. Part 3. The entity between morning. Sunlight filtered through the storm clouds as Olivia paced the East Wing laboratory, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations and theories. 3 days had passed since the observer had revealed itself. 3 days of working alongside Julian during his increasingly brief periods of lucidity. The quantum field isn't just theoretical, Julian explained, sketching diagrams with feverish intensity. It's a substrate underlying reality, the space between particles where probability exists before collapsing into certainty. And you believe this? Observer exists there? Olivia struggled to reconcile her scientific training with what she was witnessing. Not just exists, it is the field in some sense. A gestalt awareness formed from the quantum probability of all conscious thought. Julian's hands trembled as he worked. My experiment created a bridge, allowing it partial access to our reality through consciousness itself. Dr. Eleanor Reed entered with Julian's latest brain scans. The neural degradation is accelerating, she reported grimly. The competing consciousness signatures are causing structural damage. How long? Olivia asked. At this rate? Days, not weeks. After Eleanor left, Julian collapsed into a chair. There's something I need to show you. He handed Olivia a small data drive. Security footage from the compound the night of my experiment. The video showed Julian and Fiona Langley, a striking woman with close-cropped dark hair, making final adjustments to the apparatus. They seated themselves in the twin chairs, electrodes attached to their temples, excitement visible on their faces. The transfer initiated with a pulse of blue light. Then everything went wrong. The equipment surged with impossible energy. Both researchers convulsed. The air between them seemed to ripple, distorting like heat waves. Then Fiona went limp, while Julian screamed, a sound Olivia would never forget, raw and primal and terrified. When security personnel rushed in, Julian was unconscious, but breathing. Fiona showed no vital signs despite frantic resuscitation attempts. 3 days later, she was declared brain dead, Julian said quietly as the footage ended. But that's not what happened. She's still alive, trapped in here. He tapped his temple. Along with the observer. And you want me to help separate them? To free Fiona? Julian's expression darkened. It's too late for that. The damage to her consciousness is too extensive. But there's something else. He hesitated. Something about your research team. Olivia went still. What about them? The observer didn't just cause the explosion, it harvested them. Harvested their consciousness signatures in the moment of death. When awareness separates from the physical brain, the observer can capture it, feed on it. Julian's voice dropped to a whisper. But it doesn't consume everything. Fragments remain, stored in the quantum field. Hope and horror warred within Olivia. Are you saying my team is still conscious somewhere? Not conscious, fragmented. But with the right apparatus, those fragments could potentially be reassembled. That night, unable to sleep, Olivia wandered the compound's empty corridors. The storm had intensified, lightning illuminating the architectural angles in stark flashes. She found herself drawn to Julian's private study, hoping to review his research notes. Inside, she discovered Eleanor Reed rifling through Julian's desk. "What are you doing?" Olivia demanded. Eleanor straightened, no guilt on her face. "My job, Dr. Winters, protecting Julian." By going through his private files, by monitoring the observer's influence. Eleanor's professional demeanor cracked, revealing exhaustion and fear. "I've watched it slowly consume him for months. You're not the first specialist he's brought here, you know." What happened to the others? They disappeared, left in the night, according to Julian. Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "But I checked the security logs. No one left this island." The preparations took 18 frantic hours as the storm raged unabated around the compound. Julian's condition deteriorated rapidly, periods of lucidity growing shorter, the observer's influence stronger. Twice they had to sedate him when the entity seized control, his body convulsing as consciousness battled consciousness for dominance. "The quantum bridge modifications are complete," Olivia announced, making final adjustments to the apparatus. She'd once considered impossible. Now, after everything she'd witnessed, the boundaries between theoretical and actual had blurred beyond recognition. Julian, momentarily himself, studied her work with admiration. "You've mastered in hours what took me years to develop." "I had a good foundation," she replied, not looking up from the calibrations. "And motivation." Eleanor Reed's unconscious form had been secured in the compound's medical bay, the neural suppressant keeping the observer dormant within her. But they both knew it wouldn't last. The entity was adapting, learning to overcome the chemical barriers. "If this works," Julian said quietly, "what remains of Fiona will transfer back to her physical body, potentially reactivating her autonomous functions." Olivia nodded. "But the clinical death period was only 3 minutes before life support was established. With the quantum bridge accelerating neural reconnection, she might recover." Olivia didn't voice the obvious, that the observer might simply jump to Fiona's revived body or worse, spread between all of them. Some risks couldn't be mitigated, only accepted. As Julian made final preparations, Olivia reviewed the fragments of code she'd extracted from the Norwegian facility's backup systems, code that contained quantum signatures matching those in Julian's apparatus. The connection between the two research projects was undeniable now, both unwittingly creating doorways for the same entity. "Julian," she called, "I think I've identified the quantum frequency where the observer first manifested." He joined her. At the workstation, leaning close enough that she could feel the unnatural heat radiating from him, a physical symptom of the consciousness overload his brain was struggling to manage. "If we can isolate that frequency," he said, "we could potentially trap it there during the transfer process." Their eyes met, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. In another lifetime, they would have been intellectual equals, perhaps partners. In this one, they were strangers thrown together by forces beyond comprehension, yet connected by something that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Julian," Olivia began hesitantly, "if something goes wrong, don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "This will work." "You can't know that." "I can." He touched her face with surprising tenderness. "Because in every quantum probability I've calculated, there exists at least one outcome where we succeed." The moment was interrupted by alarms blaring throughout. "The compound. Security breach," Julian said, scanning the monitors. "Eleanor's containment has been compromised." On screen, they watched Eleanor's body moving with inhuman precision through the corridors, effortlessly overriding security systems with a touch. The observer had adapted faster than anticipated. "We need to start now," Julian insisted, already moving toward the primary chair in the apparatus. "We're not ready. We're out of time." He secured himself in the chair, attaching neural interfaces with practiced movements. "The isolation frequency is our best chance. Set the quantum trap, then take the secondary position." Olivia worked, with desperate efficiency, programming the trap frequency into the system while monitoring Julian's rapidly deteriorating neural patterns. The observer was fighting for complete control, causing seizure-like activity in his frontal lobes. "Stay with me," she whispered, securing herself in the second chair. Just as she initiated the activation sequence, the laboratory doors burst open. Eleanor stood in the doorway, but the entity controlling her body had dropped all pretense of humanity. Her movements were jerky, mechanical, her expression blank and her eyes reflecting nothing. "This accomplishes nothing," the observer said, through her. "We exist in the space between certainties. You cannot trap probability itself." "Watch us try," Olivia replied, and pressed the final activation. Blue light engulfed them as the quantum bridge engaged. Olivia felt an immediate sensation of expansion, as though her consciousness were being stretched beyond the confines of her physical form. Julian's mind touched hers, brilliant and complex and beautiful in its intricate architecture. Behind it came another consciousness, Fiona's, fragmented but recognizable, a kaleidoscope of memories and knowledge and emotion. And then, the observer. It wasn't human. It wasn't even singular. It was a vast, cold intelligence that existed as pure mathematical potential, viewing reality as equations to be solved, consciousness as energy to be harvested. It regarded human awareness as humans might regard bacterial colonies. Fascinating in the abstract, useful in certain applications, but ultimately insignificant. Yet as it flowed across the bridge into Olivia's mind, she sensed something unexpected. Within it, curiosity. The observer didn't just feed on consciousness. It studied it, collected it, like a cosmic librarian preserving fragments of awareness across time. And within those collections, she found what she sought: familiar patterns, beloved minds reduced to quantum echoes, but unmistakably present. Thomas, Rebecca, Emerson. The entire Norwegian team, preserved like insects in amber. With every ounce of will she possessed, Olivia executed the trap sequence, isolating the observer's frequency while simultaneously drawing the fragments of her team toward the safety of her own consciousness. The laboratory exploded in cascading light as the quantum bridge overloaded. Eleanor's body collapsed, the observer momentarily severed from its host. Julian convulsed in his chair, his neural patterns restructuring as Fiona's consciousness separated from his. And in the chaos between, Olivia felt her mind fracturing under, the strain of multiple consciousness signatures seeking refuge within her. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Julian reaching for her hand across the impossible chasm between their chairs. Part 5. Quantum. Hart's consciousness returned to Olivia in fragments. Sensory impressions without context, memories without chronology, soft beeping of medical equipment, cool sheets against her skin, the scent of antiseptic and sea air. "She's stabilizing," came Eleanor Reed's voice, professional once more. Neural activity approaching normal parameters. "And the others?" Julian's voice, weak but unmistakably his own. "Fiona's condition is unchanged. Still comatose, but her brain shows increasing activity." Olivia opened her eyes to bright morning light. The storm had passed, leaving crystalline blue skies visible through the medical suite's windows. Julian sat beside her bed, haggard but present in a way he hadn't been before. Singular, wholly himself. "Welcome back," he said softly. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." Memory rushed back. The quantum bridge, the observer, the fragments of her team she'd tried to preserve. Did it work? Julian's expression was complex. Partially. The observer is contained, isolated in a quantum field generator without access to consciousness or electronic systems. And Fiona? Alive. Her body is functioning, but her consciousness is fragmented. The damage was too extensive for complete restoration. His eyes held sorrow and guilt in equal measure. The medical team is hopeful, but realistic. Olivia struggled to sit up, assessing her own mind. She felt different, expanded somehow, as though her consciousness had been rewritten at a fundamental level. "My team?" Julian took her hand. "That's where we succeeded. The quantum signatures you pulled from the observer, they're intact, stored in isolated neural networks we've constructed based on your research. They're alive. Not alive in the conventional sense, but preserved, and with time and the right technology, potentially restorable." Tears blurred Olivia's vision. After 6 months of grief and guilt, the possibility of saving even fragments of her team was more than she dared hope for. "There's something else," Julian continued hesitantly. "The process changed you. Your neural architecture has been enhanced. You're perceiving quantum probability states directly." She had noticed something, an awareness of potential outcomes, surrounding every decision, branching possibilities visible just at the edge of perception. "A side effect of the observer's brief presence in your mind," Julian explained. "It appears to be stable, non-progressive." Eleanor entered with a tablet, displaying Olivia's latest scans. "The modifications are remarkable," she said, clinical curiosity overriding her usual reserve. "Your brain is processing information in quantum states rather than binary ones. In essence, you're thinking in possibilities rather than certainties." "And the observer?" Olivia asked. "Contained, but not destroyed," Julian admitted. "It exists as pure quantum information now, unable to access consciousness or electronic systems. For how long? Indefinitely, in theory. But the containment requires constant monitoring." 1 week later, Olivia stood at the edge of the island's cliffs, watching waves crash against the rocks below. Behind her, Julian's compound hummed with renewed purpose. Teams of